plenty wrecked, but it was getting pretty shabby.
Yeah. Well, you've had a pretty good life out of 50 plus years.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll get more than that out of this one.
It's interesting. I was reflecting when I came out this morning on the legacy of research work that's been done on Hillgrove over the years with CSIRO, some with the Department of Prime Industries, some with Tropical Weeds Research Centre over, I guess, a long period of time, and largely as a result of your dad's interest in research. And yeah, there's a lot of good stuff being done here.
Yeah, Dad was very proactive in that area. Had a lot of stuff going over the years, and kept a strong interest in it all through his career. So yeah, and you know, we've always had good relations with the department, CSIRO or the DPI as it was. Yeah, so it's been good over the years. You sort of get to know all the players involved and the latest ideas and research and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it was that field day that was held here in I think it was June 1990 with the Land Care Committee. It was a huge field day. It was on managing basalt country, and while it did cover some of the CSIRO research work, there's also a lot of information, I guess, how Hillgrove's managed, how other basalt properties were managed. So it was a good balance of grazier presenters and science-based presenters, and I think people got a lot out of that field. I mean, it's a long time ago now, but it's one that's fairly vivid in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, well, especially that the period in the 80s where M8U became a thing and was actually, you know, would have been largely, that information and research would have been disseminated by DPI, obviously. But we look back on it, even then in the 90s, but certainly now, we look back on it as a time when a lot of damage was done by the new technology, which is, you know, that's the story of life. And I think people have worked, well, most people have worked out how to back off and utilise it, partly because it's more expensive than it used to be then anyway, so they're sort of forced on them. But it's a good example of how, yeah, sometimes the technology can lead to problems, but or the new ideas, but yeah, eventually it sort of works itself out, and yeah, and it's a very useful tool nowadays.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's a classic example of one piece of technology or one practice not being thought through in terms of the impact, particularly in that case on the land, because it did give people the potential to literally eat everything and end up with a bare landscape.
Barked a lot.
And at a certain point of time too, when, you know, a lot of high Brahman content as well, you couldn't have done that with the old, you know, the cattle 30 years before. You couldn't have done as much damage.
No, and particularly in the 80s being a run of either drought years or below average years.
And the years were bad as well.
There wasn't much, it wasn't a huge volume of grass or body of feed anyway, so yeah. It was.
And it, not only, like, you could have really poor cattle, but they'd still be strong enough to get on a truck. Of course, at the time they should have put them on a truck, but they didn't, because they chose to keep them. But anyway, that's, yeah, they're all lessons that had to be learnt.
Sure. Yeah, but no, your dad he really supported a lot of scientific research on the property, and it was a tremendous benefit to the whole region. So, and they still publishing papers out of some of that data, even today.
Yeah. I think one of his pet bugbears at the time, and probably still is, was drought subsidies, and which he saw as aiding and abetting overstocking or whatever. And again, I think a lot of that thinking around those sort of things has changed. It's always going to be a very political area, so it's hard to completely reform it, but I think it's a lot more targeted and sensible than it used to be.
I think it is, and there's more emphasis on sort of preparing for drought and rather than what you do once you're in drought, and people not waiting for a drought declaration before they do something.
Yes. I think in general people aren't interested on that economic, they're just keeping the numbers. Like, they're a bit more aware on the whole of the landscape, more than the cattle numbers that used to rule their world.
So I mean, we're obviously in a good season now, and the cycle always turns, so eventually we'll get back into a run of lean seasons again. What's your sort of thinking these days on how you sort of manage going into poorer seasons or even drought years?
Probably my main strategy is it's to do with a sort of a herd structure, running a certain number of breeders, but in my case I mostly spay and retain most of my cull heifers. Given that I'm also in the process of trying to increase the poll percentage in the herd, so it's that sort of two things going on at once, which is a welfare and just a personal choice as well. Also something that my father had a big interest in kicking off, and also the poll gene itself was at a cooperation between with DPI Cyro and I can't remember all of the parties, but looking
one of the universities as well.
The universities looking for the poll gene marker for Brahmins, which they did find, and is now commercially available, and I still use to this day in my selection process. But yes, the herd structure thing is basically the theory. The philosophy I follow is I don't do any trading anymore, and I pay a price for that. But I basically have all the dry cattle, male and female. I just treat them, the females, just like another steer, if you like. They're spayed and they're grown out to 2.5, 3 years, the same as a bullock. But it means that as it gets dry, I can get rid of them.
Sure.
And of course, especially in recent times, you can get rid of them at any age and get paid well for them.
The market's hot, isn't it?
It's absolutely hot. It won't be like that forever, but that way you sort of the last mob you get back into are your breeders. Like if it just completely stopped raining forever, which like it can do at Winton or somewhere, it seems like forever. It won't stop forever, but it seems like forever at times. You can go right back to your better heifers or something like that if you had to. That's sort of the last resort, and then build back from there. Not that there's anything particularly special about the herd, but we have put in a fair bit of time, especially now with the polls. I'd hate to have to go and try and buy that again at the moment. But there's really no need. We always get some sort of season. So if you can match the numbers in your grass to the season you're faced with or you're likely to be faced with, you're fine. And that's, we do a little bit. I mean, I keep an eye on the seasonal forecasts and whatever. There's not a lot of instances where I've made an actual concrete change because of what I've seen but it does influence you. It's in the background. A couple of years ago, I did make very much a change I did some aerial seeding, which is something we don't normally do after a fire. And a large part of the reason I did that is because the fire was in November. The outlook was very, very positive. It was almost absolutely guaranteed that it was going to rain and fairly soon, like December or January. And so I went ahead with it, and it did rain. I don't think we actually got much of a result. We probably won't know for a couple of years. But there's no doubt that I made that decision partly on that forecast that was ahead of me, whereas even just a year before, it was almost the same circumstances, but the fire was in October. The outlook wasn't too bad, but it wasn't as strong, and it was more likely to rain in December, January, and under that situation, and I wasn't comfortable throwing all those dollars out on the ground in October or something, in the hope that it would.
That's right, particularly to have it germinate, step into 6 weeks of hot, dry weather and lose a lot.
Exactly, especially it was coated seed, so it meant that, if it all germinated, which it should all germinate if it's coated, treated seed, and then it just gets the wrong break, you've done the whole lot. I mean, as it turns out, we may have done it anyway, but that's, that was the thinking behind it. But day to day, we don't, like I say, the climate forecasts are just in the background. It's almost subliminal where you might just say, oh, well, maybe we'll sell a few more here or there. But there's lots of other factors. Like at the moment, I'm probably down a little on numbers because of the whole foot and mouth lumpy skin thing. I haven't gone mad, but I think like a lot of people, the price is good. You just lower your risk a bit by putting them in the bank. But you know, there's a price to pay. Like your brandings will come back or whatever. You know, there's little knock-on effects.
Yeah. There's an interesting point you raised, Bill, about that forage budgeting. So I mean, you can do a formalised forage budget where you actually go and assess the pasture and calculate a stocking rate. But I find the good managers, for example yourself and Millie, you sort of intuitively do it. You drive through a paddock, you do a water run or a lick run, you're looking to see how much pasture's there, the time of year that you're doing the run, maybe, like you say, a bit about what the outlook is like for the next season, and you make a call on adjusting numbers either up or down. So
yeah, I'm a bit jealous of the people that can actually put it down on paper or on computer or whatever it is. But I'm just not that disciplined, but it is there, it's in the background. Probably the basic one, the very, very basic one was, you know, from the kitchen table, was from my father saying, you know, on Hillgrove we've got 10 beast to 10 acres, beast to 20 acres, and beast to 30 acres, the three main land types. Yes. But you know, there's plenty of times we're under that or we're over it, and like you say, you know, there's spots now that I can take to you too that have been a bit overcooked, if you like.
Sure.
But in the back of my mind, I'll be trying to empty them out for some period at least over the next wet, or lightened off, or there'll be some sort of thing in the back of my mind that says, you know, that needs a bit of a spell, or that needs a rest. This one can handle more numbers for a bit longer, as long as I give it a spell or something. You know, you balance that up, because you know, I've done all the workshops with you guys or whatever. Moving it back up from C&D's not hard much. Yards. It's hard yard. It's not much fun. There's no future in it. If you can stay in oscillating between A and B, maybe dipping into C occasionally. But yeah, better off staying in A and B. Your life and your choices are so much easier, and you're much more resilient. But you know, there's lots of other factors. You know, people that have, you know, buying new country and you know, obviously nowadays paying a lot of money for it. Yes. More than ever. It's always been dear, but it's never been cheap. But it's tough now. But you long term, that's where you want to aim for.
Going back to the forage budgeting again, I take your point about sitting down and crunching the numbers. I mean, it still is only an estimate. I mean, it's really hard, even when driving around, to say, well, there's X amount of feed there, because in reality you probably see 2% of the property or the paddock.
Yes.
There's some online tools that are coming available now based on satellite imagery to actually give an estimate of yield. They still need to be ground truthed, but once you've done a bit of ground truthing, you can get a pretty accurate result of the amount of feed that's in the paddock. Still only an approximation, because things like animal behaviour, land type preference really manipulate where cattle will graze in a paddock. There's a lot going on there.
Yes, we have a bit of an issue on the other side of the road here with the cattle, just the young cattle go over there, the lighter country, as weaners and taken out again as yearlings to spread around the bullock paddocks and wherever else with the heifers and join the heifers. And they just keep coming back to the road. Do they? And they just keep coming back. And I think it partly, they were weaned over here on a really good basalt paddock. That might be some of it. I think it's the prevailing wind, I think, brings them back to the east. Other than that, I'm not sure. They like looking at cars go past. I'm not sure what it is. But I think, you know, I've got to look at maybe doing a bit of a subdivision to try and control some of that, but then I have to get water at first. So and these are just, again, I wouldn't have written these down. These are just sitting in the back of my head. They sort of sit there and stew away, and if something else comes up that I think might be a better idea, I might switch to it. And it won't happen overnight, but hopefully it'll happen eventually.
I suppose the other thing, that's an interesting one, because I know that, you know, over the decades, Hillgrove's had a fairly long history of using fire as a management tool. Whether there's any option to use fire in some of those instances to attract cattle to one side of a paddock or one end of a paddock, just to get them to change their grazing behaviour.
That's a thing. That's an area that I've put a lot of thought into over the years. I know I've had plenty of discussions with you, Bob, and other DPI people over the years. I remember having a talk with Peter O'Regan when I was still at Lockwar, saying how I'd like to get more fire in to get more black speargrass. And he was looking at me saying, "Bill, you know, black speargrass is not that good a field." I said, "Well, it's better than white speargrass is what I'm looking at now."
I agree.
Because that was on that desert uplands country.
Yeah.
But like everywhere, a huge lack of fires, and compared to history, and still not happening except accidentally, and of course then they're quite hot and extensive and hard to put out, and melt a few power lines, sometimes power lines, but pipelines and
Sure.
strainer posts are always a pain after a fire.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, you know, it's something we still got to look at a way of trying to get them reintroduced, just for a weed suppression thing as well, and a thickening thing. Since I can't get a carbon credit for the thickening that's already happened.
Yeah, although when you drive around the district, I mean, a lot of Hillgrove, particularly the basalt country, is still like an open
Still
savanna.
pretty open, yeah.
Whereas in a lot of other areas, it's the open savanna is probably 50 years behind us. It's thickened up dramatically.
Yeah.
Significant impact on carrying capacity. I've been to Hillgrove many times over the years, both with your parents here, and then in more recent years with both of you. And always enjoyed my visits here. Always learned something. Like I said before, good support of research. The other thing I found is, and it was a meeting that was a group of senior public servants from Canberra came here in, I'm thinking about 94, 95, and your father just opened up the books, everything. It was complete and utter open book, you know, about what the financial situation of the business was. Had the cattle records going back to 1900, and they came away from that meeting just really astounded with how open the story was at Hillgrove. So I mean, I'm going to be retiring in a couple of months' time, and this will probably be one of my last visits to Hillgrove as an extension professional, but of course I have to come back socially a bit more, but that's another story. But I know it's been great working with the Manns, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, got a lot out of it. I think industry has too.
Yeah, no, but we appreciate that you've been part of it too, Bob. It's you know, it's been a big part of how the relationship is carried on for so long. You've done a terrific job in the district facilitating all this. Like it just doesn't happen. Graziers, particularly beef cattle graziers, are a notoriously independent, insulated lot, and I think that's part of one of the things Dad was, you know, trying to counter. He has always been very open with that sort of thing. It hasn't always suited. I know Millie hasn't been too happy about me following some of that openness, because it's just a different, you know, different family cultures.
Yeah, well, everyone's got different personalities.
And personalities, exactly. But we, you know, we've benefited, but really appreciate Bob's whole career in this area. He's certainly made for the job, and you know, it's not just with the department. It's Bob and Leanne who it's the whole community. It's something that you've done a wonderful job. You know, whether it be your kids' piece, you know, parents committee, or the Friends of the Theatre, or there's countless things. I couldn't possibly remember them all. But you've both been very active locally, and I think that's, you know, that's also, and it's flowed through the deep go. You'd see it with the younger staff at the department in there now. There's a lot of that goes on as well, and it just makes sense in so many levels. It's better for you, and your life, and it's better for the community life, and it's an unpaid and unheralded often, but it's definitely it's a huge thing. But yeah, like I said before, most graziers are pretty happy to sit on their little dunghill and do their own thing and twiddle their thumbs and maybe point their finger at the fella over the fence a bit every now and then. But the biggest job you guys do is you know, get the field days happening, get people interacting and talking, to mine down to what works and what doesn't work, or what might work for them, what might improve for them, and that you know, everyone in the industry and everyone's better for that. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, no, it's that business about property visits, about I guess getting involved in community other than strictly your work, and that's something I've tried to impart to new extension staff
Yes.
too. I mean, they don't have to be on every committee in town, but get involved in something.
Something, yeah.
Outside of work,
Yeah.
it's in the local community. Because I mean, you know, you bump into people that are on properties in town, whether it's out at the sale yards or whether it's at the show, annual show or whatever. And it's just another connection those extension staff can make with producers. And you know, you build up the rapport, you build up the networks, and you know, then you know, when you want to organise a field day or a workshop or something, you've got a few producers you can go to and say, are you interested in this? Would you be prepared to host something? So it's all about relationships, extension. Yeah.
And there's always an issue. There's, you know, right now the cattle industry is sailing along pretty well. It's, if you're not making money now, get out now. You're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, there'll be something. There's things lurking about, and it's having the staff on the ground. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be disaster times to have the value, and you know, if the staff are already there and that the relationships are already there, when that next thing comes along, you're so much further down the road. You're sort of onto the front foot straight away. Because, I mean, well, lumpy skin, I mean, we've got to get lumpy skin, don't we? Like, at some point it just seems inevitable, but who knows, we might get away with it.
Yeah.
Foot and mouth, it looks like we possibly could dodge it, but it's still sitting there. But that's only two things, you know, the whole carbon thing is going to affect all agriculture, especially livestock. At some point we can't ignore it forever.
No. Inflation's rising.
Yes, yeah, and
Cost of production, yeah.
And of course the old, you know, the weeds and pests, they're not going to go away by themselves either. That's always going to be there, erode, all those sort of things. And I think it's just, and obviously the droughts will come back.
Yeah, sure.
You know, I mean, I'd be in trouble with my father even calling it a drought. He doesn't like the idea of drought. But you know, it doesn't matter what you call it. We're going to have dry periods, and you know, and the severity of which we don't really know until it happens, and
All the duration.
and all the things sitting behind it. Like, I mean, the last dry period, you know, here we hardly knew that the cattle were easy to sell, the prices remained good. It was just amazing. Like, normally that's a painful time because you got more sales, but the press sales were, in this
prices are down.
The prices are down. In this case, we're selling into a good market, and and you know, people were selling cattle, but then buying a better bull or something like that. So they were, and probably, you know, their herds were probably being upgraded if they did it cleverly.
Yes.
And if they weren't too stressed in that they had to sell everything all at once, they'd probably come out of it better than they went into it. And drought was an opportunity.
Yeah.
And, you know, apart from anything else, people usually got more cash flowing around. But you know, I know there are other factors too, and you don't want to be going back to buy breeders in that period. It would have been a very, very painful experience. Or usually all you could buy was a heifer, and then you got to wait around for it to be.
That's right.
But you know, these are all things that you know, you can be helped through the department and the extension, pointed in the right direction, and not every bit of information suits, but it's somewhere to go, and they're being able to know where all these resources are is the first step usually.
And the other thing is with a network, so you might be, or a producer might be interested in something. The extension officer mightn't have too many ideas on it, but there's chances they'll know another producer that's been doing it for the last 5 years and doing it well, and simply putting people in contact. I mean, even in the same district, I've occasionally made the mistake of assuming that property A knows property B, and they might be 6 properties apart, but often they don't.
No.
And just to give the details, a phone number and an email address, and say, look, contact so-and-so, they've been doing this for quite a few years with good results. And I mean, a simple phone call and you've got a bit of first-hand information and a very applied information. Yeah.